Ita Brand is an intimacy coordinator and a movement director for film, television, and theater. Ita has also taught at some of Britain's leading drama, opera, and film schools. In 2017, Ita introduced the Intimacy on Set guidelines as an industry standard to protect performance during scenes that involve intimacy, sexual content, and nudity. She has pioneered the role of intimacy coordinator, which is gaining adoption in leading production houses including HBO, Netflix, and the BBC. In 2018, Ita founded Intimacy on Set to provide trained professionals intimacy coordinators to the industry.
And next, we would like to welcome Rowan Ast, and she's an ex-TV person turned academic, having worked as a production manager and researcher on shows, including the Newsnight Review before joining academia. Sit down. Rowan's academic research focuses on the ethics and care in the television production and as an academic. With Michelle Reynolds, Rowan is co-director at Real Time Media and consults on how to put theories of good work into practice into TV industry and film. And she has published widely on her practices and ethics of care in both TV and film.
Next, we have Bobby Jani. Is head of skills for Film London, and skills is something Bobby knows a lot about, having occupied several roles in production, including cinematographer, gaffer, and director throughout his career. Prior to joining Film London, Bobby was course leader in film productions and Arts University Burma. At Film London, Bobby oversees their skills initiatives, including the new Metro London Skills Cluster, dedicated to supporting the development of skills pipeline for the screen industries in film, TV, games, and animation. Film London has also just launched their Screen Entrant Training program, which we hope to hear more from Bobby.
And next, I would like to introduce Tanya Redden. And she has worked on a various distinguished career working as an editor in British and American television and film. Tanya's television credits include Dirty Filthy Love, for which she received a BAFTA nomination, Filthy Fathoms, 50 Fathoms in Sky Gorillas, Luther, Scylla, Low Winter Sun, as well as Sky's Mad Dog series, and Generation Kill. Recent credits include Summerland, the debut feature film from an award-winning theater director and playwright, Jessica Swall, The Salisbury Poisonings for BBC One, and Michael Winterbottom's This England.
Potted history, I started dancing at the age of 3, trained, and then as a dancer, worked as a musical theatre dancer for 10 years, trained at Bristol Vic as an actor in the postgrad course, worked as an actor for 8 years, and I did the MA in movement studies when my children were young, and worked as a movement teacher and a movement director, and then during that time I started writing my own work, and I put on a devised piece of work called April's Fall in 2009, and then I was looking at extracting the core of that, which was looking at the dynamic of abuse and how very often the victim and the perpetrator are flip sides of the same coin. And it was in that work that I started investigating how do I, as a creator of work, make sure I put in place a really robust structure to allow my actors to come and really explore challenging content, to be present with themselves in the space and with their fellow participants, and then how to leave that work and step away from it, both at the end of the rehearsal day and at the end of the whole period. And one of my colleagues, Meredith Dufton, who's the head of movement at Mount View, then said, "You are creating a structure in order to work with intimacy in a professional way. Please do come in and start teaching what you're developing." And that was April 2015. And as I taught over the years, we investigated it, sort of led the learnings back into the process, and by 2017 I'd written the Intimacy on Set guidelines, started to share them with the industry. But there was a few closed doors, and then come October 2017, Weinstein allegations happened, the subsequent meeting in Time's Up movement, and with flip of the industry with the intention of saying we have to do better, we can't turn a blind eye, then the industry was ready to listen. And so I shared the work, and so the first productions that I worked as an intimacy coordinator was Sex Education, Gentleman Jack and Watchmen, and then subsequently Normal People, It's a Sin, I May Destroy You, and the list goes on.
I suppose I came to this primarily as a film fan and a film and television fan. So having loved TV and cinema growing up, and then studied it way back in the 90s, and then having sort of making short films and things like that when I first graduated, and then leaving. I followed a boy to Australia and ended up marrying him, and understanding it then as something that wasn't done. So I'd almost rejected the industry before my career had started properly. So this kind of gave me this strange insight into the way that people expected you to give everything to a career in film and TV. While I was in Australia, I started a career in TV and then continued that when I came back to work at the BBC. Again, I had a strange understanding of my good fortune, having landed at BBC Arts, but also being a young woman in that environment, how I was expected to behave and how I didn't fit that requirement because I was actually slightly older than I looked. I was already married, so I didn't have the same sort of modes of behaviour as other young women. I then left television a few years later after my first child turned. She was about 2, and started doing my doctorate. Did a lot of interviews with editors during my doctorate, and became really interested in management practices, so the way people express what made them happy and the way people express what made them unhappy. That kind of coincided with the Sowell allegations, so in the same way that you've described about Weinstein, this particular moment in television as bringing forth a lot of kind of cultural inequalities that allowed certain behaviours, in some cases criminal, in some cases just really poor conditions, particularly for women. And then, so yeah, when my doctorate finished, worked in university and started to understand more about skills and training, the failure of skills and training to equip particularly women, and particularly if you're a woman from an underrepresented group, and then having moved into the more consultant training space, thinking a lot about how to put these practices into the workplace.
My career path was fairly straightforward in that I did go to film school. Yep. I wasn't originally thinking I'd do editing. I was kind of doing screenwriting and other things, made a few short films and stuff. And actually, this is going to sound dodgy, but I would say that maybe my first break probably came out of a guy coming down to the film school and training us all on what was called Lightworks, which was a precursor to Avid, really, or at the same time as Avid. And I was the only female doing editing, so I trained in it. And probably when I look back at it, he probably was helping me out, like we were going for a lot of lunches, which I'd say was a bit of a pattern at certain points in my career. Oh, we're at lunch again, but there's no job. This is weird. I thought we were going to talk about a job. Anyway, but actually he wasn't inappropriate, and he did recommend me for something. So and actually, it's a long story, but I didn't actually end up getting that job, but I got another job. But when I first entered the industry, luckily enough, there was a little moment in the mid-90s where a load of French female editors were really fashionable working on films in this country. So my in was with editors who you've probably never heard of, but editor for Joël Hache, a French film editor. There was Noel Masson next door. There was a woman that is now a good friend of mine called Fola, who was editing her first feature, a black woman, which was unheard of, still almost unheard of, editing her first feature on the floor. So my first step into the industry was almost unrealistic, and gave me this idea that this was the way it was going to be. Obviously beyond that, and by the way, it was a Harvey Weinstein film. In fact, we were talking about it on the way over, because I remember how acceptable it was to be, everyone was completely petrified of him, and actually post that film I understood that there were really inappropriate stuff with Asia Argento on set, the Italian actress who was the lead. There was just stuff going on that obviously I wasn't really aware of, except it was okay to have a culture of fear. Beyond that, I'd say that I did the path, I went through the ranks, I became an editor eventually. But the atmosphere, as I said, was very much, I think, time and time again, I'd be working in some post-production house on a film, and some editor bloke from upstairs working on a big movie would go, hey, when did you want to come and work on my film? And then we go for lunch or for dinner or for whatever, and it would be like, oh, there's no job involved here. And what I found actually is that I felt like I had to be a lot more serious and work a hell of a lot harder than any of the guys around to get right. Even at film school I did, I think of, I'm going to sort of guess the numbers, of the 10 productions at film school when we graduated, I think I cut 7 of them, and there would have been, you had to try and get the work, and all the guys would think I was being a bit too serious, but the point is that I kind of knew in the back of my mind that if I didn't put the work in, no one would take me seriously, because when I entered the industry and started to work, not just as a trainee, but as an editor, I would get a second look every time I walked into a room, and I knew I had to convince them that it's not even that people are particularly conscious of it, it's just that I'm not the sort of person that they would expect to trust in that situation. So I had to earn the trust every time I walk into the room, and that is not just to do with being a woman, it's to do with being a woman of colour. I'd almost say the race issue might even outweigh the female issue, but of course being a woman is part of it. And in a way, I guess in the end I got lucky in that I cut a really bad, like one of the worst films ever made, I cut and I thought I'll never work again. And then I ended up at a friend's mum's dinner party, and I met a director there, and he said, why don't you come and interview for this TV job? And I ended up getting it, and then I ended up working with him a lot, because every single time, even when having kids, I came back from maternity and did one of his jobs. It was always one of the shows on telly that year that everyone respected. And so actually, he ended up being my saviour, if you like. Because then suddenly I had a CV that people respected. And so occasionally, yes, I'd go for interviews, and especially I'd say also there's a whole other thing about being a mother as well in the industry, that you go to interviews and people start asking about your childcare situation, and I don't think my partner, who's now my husband, I don't think he's ever been asked that question. But what I'm going to say finally is I think that what's difficult in entering the industry, and I hope things are changing, I hope people are a lot more outspoken. I went for a lunch recently with a load of editors, and in amongst the moaning that we all normally do, there was like really open discussion amongst some of the women about someone who was a bit handsy at a party, and the guys were getting a bit uncomfortable, but it's just a lot more appropriate now, and we can be a lot more open about inappropriate behaviour. When I started, nobody ever would have spoken about things like that, so I feel like that's been a really good change. But what I was going to say is that there was a temptation to kind of overlook the fact that, I'm not going to pretend that I didn't know sometimes that if I was going out on a lunch or a dinner that there might have been another agenda. It wasn't always a surprise. and it's tempting to take that opportunity, but you do put yourself, and I look back and I think I put myself in some vulnerable situations because I wanted to work. And so when you hear those, when those Me Too stories started to come out, and and I'm sure there was a whole sector of people reading about those situations thinking, well, why would you ever put yourself in that situation? But it's so tempting when you want the work and you want the career. So yeah, I mean that it's a fine line between.
I didn't go to film school when I started, so I studied engineering, and then I got my first film job walking towards home, seeing somebody filming outside of my home, asking them if I can actually stay around, take a look, stay there for 3 days, making coffee. They like it. They gave me a position. They gave me a position as a camera trainee. I worked on that film for 3 months, skipping the school without parents knowing. And I started working in that position and gradually moved up to become a camera trainee, or camera assistant.
So now I know why you looked at Babby when you said about camera.
As a camera second AC, horrible second AC I was, dropped 3 rolls of exposed film into the river in my first job. It was horrible, so I just realized that that route is not my route, so I'm just moving away towards lighting department, and started growing through the lighting department, became a gaffer, and later on as a DOP. When I moved to the UK, I studied video arts in general, fine arts is my passion, and then growing and started working in the UK, moved to London and started working in a coffee shop, and then tried to create my links with different people, started working as a gaffer, cinematographer at times, while developing some of my skills in order to be able to work at a higher education level. I strongly believe in higher education level, higher education in general. I can give you some reasoning behind that, but I do think that these places are the places that people can create a significant change. During that process, I started working by opening a company to have actually this. That was my first title of work as well in 2015. Hear my voice, to provide opportunities to a small group of people, again running the trainings in coffee shops to help the people to develop their ideas, grew up, maybe get a small amount of funding, and to try to make a film. My work grows, coming back to the place, I saw the advertisement of the Film London, said, okay, let's go for it. And then I went for it, and I started this job, which has been fascinating. I'm on it for 8 months, working with people like Ita as well, which is great, and hopefully we can actually create the right impact for every single group which we consider as underrepresented or marginalized.
Best practice is when, from the producer, director, that everybody, as far as I'm concerned, basically has heard the work, listened to the process, and just basically supports it. End of. People say to me, what are challenging intimate scenes? No intimate scene, if it is challenging in any way. You can have a really sort of abusive intimate scene. That's not the challenge, because when then the process is supported, then we can create anything. So best practice is putting in place so that open communication starts from the get-go, from pre-production time, creating time for the check-ins. So again, the role is about building relationship and building trust. So all of those check-ins, people say to me, tell me about your day on set. And actually all the work is basically done before the day on set. So the day on set, people look at us and go, you don't do anything. And that's because everything has been done in the prep, all those communications are made, everything is prepared, and of course then when you re-rehearse and have a crew showing, that's behind closed doors, because again, it's listened to properly, you've got a closed rehearsal room and then a closed set that's beautifully respected with no pushback, including all monitors turned off, so So the idea of having a closed set so that the intimate content is performed in a respectful way, which means that there's not a gratuitous gaze on any of that intimate content being performed. And of course now, with people having the DIT, you know, sort of everybody just on their mobile phone or their iPads has a feed, so you have to be even more vigilant that you make sure that all of those are turned off. And again, that means, you know, this role is very much, as it's developed, it's actually about knitting and communicating across departments, and it's about honouring and respecting all of the departments that are experts in their various bits of how, you know, they interface with the intimate content. So a first AD, by the time they've got to be a first AD, is an expert in holding the space, in running the floor, and in holding a closed set, but it's then collaborating with them, honouring them for their expertise, but then saying, and this is the added extra. So, for example, one of the main things that we bring that's extra is the timeout. You know, that you're sharing in an intimate scene now, for whatever reason, if someone wants to, needs to stop and halt the action for whatever reason, and there's no questions asked, that, you know, we have a timeout word or an action that's respected, stopped, down tools, take a break, no questions asked, reset, come back. So those kind of things. Yeah, you know, so if it's a scene with any form of water, a shower or whatever, you're going to work with the SFX people. Again, they're the experts in preparing the water to be safe, to be chlorinated, to be at the right temperature. So we're not doing that bit, but we are doing is liaising with the cast, going, okay, how do you like it? Someone might say, let it be boiling hot because I get freezing in the bath. Somebody else might say, please don't let it be too hot because I'll just fall asleep. So again, we're just really supporting and facilitating that open communication. So then with the younger people, it's, I suppose, for younger, you know, people coming into the industry, it's just knowing that, and again, really trusting that. So again, from actors in particular, and then anybody, all those different roles that we might interface with the intimate content, it's really knowing, tell us your requirements, and to really know that that open communication, you know, having that clarity of concerns, letting everything be known so that then things can be prepared, is what allows us to put in place a really good practice and to create really good work.
Well, I suppose I would slightly turn that round. I would say that junior staff shouldn't be expected to speak up. So everything that we do, and that speaks to what Lisa's just said, is around management practice, and it's around attentiveness to the way people are working with you, and how you expect them to work. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the issues at the moment with the way poor practice resists change is precisely because we expect the individual to speak up in a way that isn't really facilitated properly. Whereas if you have throughout this kind of practice of attentiveness to the way people are working, which Ita has just described, we actually work in a very, very attentive industry. Each project is its own ecology. You're bringing together this group of people in a way that is flexible and in a way that is designed specifically for the needs